A group of qualified Mpumalanga medical students say they're struggling to find work in the country. They graduated in medicine after studying in Russia. Registration with the Health Professions Council of South Africa seems to be at the center of the debacle. We're joined now by a student who is going through this process. She'll be speaking anonymously, but she's also joined by the South African Medical Association chairperson, Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa. Good evening to both of you. And thank you so much for your time. I think for the purposes of this conversation, we will call our anonymous guest, Mbali. Mbali, good evening to you. Thank you for your time tonight. Firstly, tell us about what your experience has been. You've spent all of this time studying medicine in Russia at the cost of the South African government or not?
Good evening. Yes, actually I was in Russia studying medicine for 6 years, and the government is the one that has been sponsoring this whole process up until we finished and we came back. So that's how we were sent there.
So it was a government-sponsored scholarship. When did you get back to the country?
So we have been back since beginning of August, and since then we have been at home sitting, doing absolutely nothing, and the government has not really been reaching out. We've been trying to reach out to them, and they keep on giving us excuses and telling us there's going to be meetings that have not been happening up until now.
What have they said is the problem, or what have you as students identified as being the problem?
So the problems that we have encountered as students so far is that we have been speaking to the government way before we graduated. They are aware of the processes that we're supposed to be going through, which was before we left the country, we were supposed to translate our documents from Russian to English, and they were also supposed to be responsible for that and actually pay for the fees for the translators and everything before we leave. But then we also had hiccups before we could leave. And then now we're back home, we had to borrow money as students from previously disadvantaged backgrounds. That was difficult for us. They told us, borrow, you will be refunded, and we still have not been refunded. And now we are at home still waiting, nothing is happening. We need money to pay for ECFMG and SARCA so that we can verify these documents that we're able to finally translate on our own, and we still have not been refunded for them. And we can't even register with HCCSA until we have registered with ECFMG. We have verified our documents with ECFMG as well as SARCA. And they promised they would pay for all of that as well. But so far, we've been trying to get meetings with them, and they have been avoiding us. So we don't really know what we're supposed to do now.
Mbali, it looks like you're not the only students that are having difficulties. Are you aware of those that have been stuck in Russia and are having difficulties in as far as accessing funds for their studies, and some of them even coming back home?
Yes, I am aware of this situation. They are actually experiencing the same thing we experienced before we came back, because while we were getting ready to come back home, they were also not paying for our not tuition fee, but they were not paying for our accommodation. They were not paying for our stipends, and instead what they did was they just paid for our flight ticket and sent us home without even paying for the translations as well. And the same thing that's happening now is what happened to us. So they're experiencing the same thing. They haven't paid for their tuition fees as well as accommodation, and they're not getting their stipends too. So it's a problem that has been happening, and we also experienced it before we were shipped home.
As a student who's gone through it, what would you say life was like when you are in a foreign country, not having access to these funds and not having any idea of when the problem will be resolved?
It was very stressful, because we had to deal with Russian landlords who were always constantly on our ear telling us, you're going to get kicked out. Some people actually almost ended up homeless because we couldn't pay for rent, and they were not paying for it, and we're still waiting. And we now, for us it is worse because we were graduates now. And if you don't have a place to stay, it means you also don't have registration. That means you are being an illegal person in the streets. You were standing a chance of being arrested. And for the stipend as well, it was a problem, because now it was like a couple of months and we're not getting money to be able to buy food and sustain ourselves, and we're stuck there and we can't even go home. So it was like a huge problem, which is why I understand what these ones that are stuck there are going through right now. Most of us who are back actually do understand very well.
All right. I'm going to ask us to leave it there with you, Mbali, and thank you so much for coming on. And as you know, Mbali is one of the students that have been affected by what is happening. It is a pseudo name that she has given us as she's speaking to us anonymously. Dr. Mzukwa, let me come to you now. As the South African Medical Association, what do you make of all of this? It's incredulous that government would spend all of these millions of rand educating these young people, and when they're back in the country and are supposed to be then of service, it seems that they're completely ignored.
Thank you, Kathy. I think we have noted a trend from the South African government where you find that there are difficulties in terms of placing students that are coming from trained by this government, funded by this government, trained abroad, but when they come back, you find that there are issues of placement. There is no coordination. Government seems to be failing to coordinate its own affairs. You'll recall that also dealing with the same issue when it comes to students that are placed in Cuba. When they have to come back, you find that also there are problems in terms of placements and all these things. And also, they feel the same thing that is felt by other students, from other places. But we've noted this one, where in Russia, our students are taken there to be educated, which is a good thing that comes from government, to be giving a child from a disadvantaged background to go and study abroad, studying medicine. And we think that it is visionary for them to be creating more opportunities for those students. But I don't think it's justifiable to be frustrating those students once they get abroad. You find that they cannot sustain themselves. They don't have, they can't buy groceries for themselves. They are threatened to be chased out of the residence. Even the university itself, there's no tuition fees paid. So it is very frustrating. How do you expect that very same students to be concentrating on the studies and performing well when there are these issues that, side issues that they are dealing up with? So those are the issues I think that government will have to coordinate itself when it comes to provision of these services to students, and also making sure that those students, they come back sound, and also they contribute, to the delivery of services within the country. I mean, that there's a dire shortage of these professionals in the country. We can't understand why there are students who cannot be taken in.
All right. Unfortunately, it looks like we've lost the South African Medical Association chairperson there, Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa, and that's a story that, of course, we'll continue to follow up on. In fact, I understand we have Mr. Mzukwa back on the line. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Kathy.
All right. Apologies, we lost you for a second there. So then let's talk about the role of your organization. What can you do in terms of helping these students?
As we are doing now, understand the extent of the problem. We need to have all those students know where they are, what is happening with them. Our membership department is dealing with that matter. And on top of that, we need to invite, the government, to talk about, this whole thing of placing interns and placing these students so that they continue serving the country. They've gone abroad, studied using taxpayers' money, and the population of South Africa is waiting for them to come back with that knowledge, and that knowledge be applied to improve the health outcomes in the country. So that's our role as an association, and also to make sure that we support them in terms of understanding their challenges, regarding HPCSA and other issues, and deal with those bottlenecks.
All right. Let's leave it there for tonight. Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa is with the Medical Association of South Africa.